Hello and welcome everybody to the Corporate Secretary Yearbook. In this video series, we're talking to nominees for the Corporate Governance Awards. Today, I'm joined by Rosemary Glazer, Senior Vice President, Corporate Secretary, and Deputy General Counsel of AIG. And we are going to be talking about her nomination for Governance Professional of the Year in the Large Cap category. Welcome, Rosemary, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You joined AIG in 2017 to lead the Corporate Secretary Office, and since then you've been a real focus of stability while there's been several directors coming and going from the board. You've had a new CEO and a new General Counsel. Then, of course, this year comes the pandemic, and you've been credited as being particularly successful in making sure that your team has been able to stay cohesive, connected, and effective. And I'd like to ask just about some of the specific initiatives that you've been working on over the past year or so. Now, your work on shareholder engagement program has again been credited with AIG securing a major increase in investor support, including on Say on Pay. Could you just talk us a little bit about how you went about this and how you were able to get that success?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. I would tell you that when I joined in 2017, AIG had not historically done any ESG shareholder engagement. There were other priorities for my predecessors, and so I had the luxury in some ways of starting from scratch with a program. And truly I credit the community, because the first year I spent asking everybody what else they did. So I asked other corporate secretaries what worked for them. I actually talked to the governance professionals at our major investors and said, what do you want to hear? How does this work? And they all gave me tips and tricks. What were the most successful engagement calls they had and what were the worst ones that they had. And we pivoted then in 2018 to starting to use those. What we found was most effective was, one, reaching out as broadly as possible. We have the benefit at AIG that we re-IPO'd in 2013. And what that means is that we're largely institutionally held, and we're not held by very many institutions. So I can reach out to my top 50 and get 2/3 of my shares outstanding, which not many large cap companies can say. But we took advantage of that, and we just asked everybody, do you want to talk to us? Now, that is the benefit of being a large cap with a Say on Pay problem. It was easy for me to get people to say yes. And I think that I'm learning now, after having had a successful Say on Pay vote, it's much harder to get those engagements to say yes, because they are, especially now in the day of the index funds, they have so many portfolio companies. I think the hardest thing is getting people to take your call. The other thing that we found that was very helpful for us was having enough people on the call to attract the shareholders to want to have the conversation with us. And for ESG, the perfect combination was having the head of HR, having our general counsel, having investor relations. But this year we added the chief sustainability officer, and that turned out to be the biggest hook that we could have added to our panel of available speakers to entice shareholders to actually say yes to our request for engagement. And it also helps that we are an all-female group. So in this day and age of diversity, we stand out because you have now a panel of 6 women on these calls answering questions, not always with equal diversity on the other side of the phone, or in this case, the video. And that has been very helpful to also reinforce our diversity message, which has been helpful this year to be able to articulate that the company is walking the talk. So, and the last thing that we did, and this came as a tip from one of the governance professionals at our investors, is we created a deck that we circulated in advance of the calls, along with bios for the participants. And in that presentation, we tried to put everything that we thought was top of mind on the governance professionals' agenda for this year. So we tried to give them a ready-made takeaway in advance of the call so that the call itself could be focused on questions that they could leverage when we get to the proxy season. They have proof that they can use with their portfolio managers to help support votes. Mm-hmm. And that has proven to also be a very effective part of our strategy that I would encourage others to also follow. And lastly, I would say our directors support us. My chair and the chair of my comp committee have made themselves incredibly available. And that's powerful, particularly for our top 10, which are almost the same top 10 as most of large cap companies this day. Being able to say I have the directors available and willing to talk is also helpful for getting kind of our foot in the door to get those calls.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Well, you were also heavily involved in making a lot of changes to AIG's proxy statement this year, and part of that being to sort of emphasize various corporate governance practices. And again, how did you sort of go about approach that and sort of making sure that was what shareholders were looking for?
Yeah, again, it was asking a lot of questions. We have been incredibly fortunate that people have answered our questions. When we say, what can we do better? What would help you, right, to support a vote? So we often heard in the first two negative say on pay conversations we had, we said, look, we had positive calls. Why did the vote go differently than what our engagement calls led us to believe, would have been an expected outcome? And increasingly, they told us they needed support. They needed support, whether it was the presentation that I talked about earlier with respect to our engagement meetings, or in the proxy. They needed things they could hang their hat on to support the vote outcomes that we were asking for. And so, we said, what kind of hooks, what do you need? What would be effective? How could we rewrite the proxy to give you what you need to be able to support these decisions? We also did the same with ISS and Glass Lewis, who were incredibly helpful to us in sharing feedback. What in our proxy was not sufficient to enable them to have a certain recommendation. If we can't change the facts in terms of what it is that we're doing, we asked, how could we say what we've done differently that would enable you to still support and recommend a yes vote or a vote in favor of the board's recommendation? And we took that to heart. We also were told we need to be more mobile reader friendly, Ben. So it was how could we revise the proxy so that when somebody's reading it on an iPad or on a phone, it was easier for them to see it, digest it, embedding links, taking out some of the cumbersome structures that made it difficult to scroll. And so we partnered with a design firm that helped us make our, proxy more kind of, mobile digital friendly to enable people to easily get to those elements in the proxy that they needed to be able to support their decision making. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, it was words, content. We just had to say things differently. We were much more, trying to be conversant in the way that we talked. We tried to be more transparent, give people more views as to what's happening in the boardroom about the decisions that were made, being less defensive about what it is we did and more positive about supporting the decisions that we made and giving people enough content to explain why those decisions were the right decisions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And, as I mentioned, you'd also overhauled some of the sort of board committee processes to try and sort of make those more effective. And just wonder if you could maybe just pick out one or two of those that were kind of, you think have had a particularly important effect on how the board operates.
It's been interesting pivoting to digital, to virtual, to not seeing everybody in person. I think we've had to learn to be more efficient about our meetings because this Zoom fatigue is a thing, and it's a thing for our directors. They also want to be able to plan a little bit better on content and what are we talking about in our meetings. So, you know, I have a great team. They develop these very robust matrices that we publish at the beginning of the year, and we include in every meeting's materials that outlines for the full year. What are the mandatory elements on the agenda? That way the directors can kind of see ahead. What are we going to cover at which meetings? How can they be sure that we're getting everything done that we're supposed to get done, whether it's under our charter or other governance documents, as well as some standing committee agenda items that they want to make sure get discussed throughout the year. Cyber is an example. They want to know which meeting are we talking about cyber and in which committees. And that, I think, has been very helpful to keep us organized, but also to help our directors better plan for meetings and for them to feel confident that we're covering all the topics that they think are important without having to pepper us throughout the year as they remember to ask a question. They now have a resource that they can go to in self-service, see for themselves, oh yes, that is on the agenda. Oh, we're going to cover that in September. And we found that that has been very helpful for them. And then the other is we've really leveraged our portal, much more so than we ever have before. We've added more content, more self-service that directors can use to just check on things themselves. We've been using it to be more communicative. So we've populated more things on there, and we're using it in lieu of email, which I get very concerned because a lot of our directors still have Google Mail and, you know, things that are maybe less secure. We've really been able to leverage the portal to put content up, and they have become very responsive to just going to the portal to source documents to help preserve confidentiality, but not restrict the amount of information we can share.
Okay, thank you. Well, Rosemary Glazer, thank you so much for your time today. Well done for the nomination, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.